Biden administration has reopened a housing facility to migrant children in Texas, a facility that was previously at the center of reports of poor living conditions, two U.S. officials told CBS News. The United States Department of Health and Human Services facility, a former camp for oil workers in Pecos, Texas, stopped housing migrant children this spring. But the site has reopened, calling itself an influx care facility amid a hike in border arrivals, which has led to a decreasing bed capacity in traditional shelters.
The facility, which is currently able to house 500 migrant adolescents, welcomed a group of minors this week, according to one of the officials. The Department of Health and Human Services told CBS News, quote, "While the Office of Refugee Resettlement's number one priority is to place children into standard care provider facilities, access to influx care facility capacity remains necessary to ensure that ORR can promptly accept referrals when ORR's other network facilities reach or approach capacity." With this in mind, the state of the ICF at Pecos has changed from warm status to active status and is currently accepting children. So this is something that Kamala Harris was supposed to be in charge of as vice president. We've discussed this on the show before, but I think that what's going on with migration under the Biden administration is very different from what any Democrat was talking about on the campaign trail in 2020. They talked about having no adolescents or minors at the border whatsoever, and that we need to end these detention facilities. Now they're kind of framing the same exact facility as a processing center. So to me, it seems that we've had little to no movement on migration. And this conversation should be more about a path forward than what do we do immediately with the migrants crossing the border? Where do we put them and how do we process them? We need forward-thinking policy on this, and we're not getting it.
Yeah, it's clear to me that the Biden administration is sort of with or having a tale of two approaches here, because, as you said, during the Trump administration and during the campaign in 2020, Biden was constantly calling Trump's immigration policy inhumane, non-compassionate. There was all of this talk about kids in cages, which of course started under the Obama administration and has been going on since as early as Bush. But then Biden has changed all of these policies that helped reduce the flow of migration, that helped clear out a lot of these facilities and prevent the overcrowding that was the subject of so many complaints. So you really can't have it both ways. Biden either needs to address the flow and reduce the number of illegal aliens who are coming across the border each month so that these facilities don't get over capacity, and so he doesn't have to reopen the centers that have been criticized for their conditions. Or he needs to, I guess, admit that he wants a more open borders policy and consequences be damned.
Yeah, it seems to me that framing the economic problems of the country the way that the mainstream has, this is both, traditional Republicans and these kind of centrist Democrats, or rather neoliberal Democrats. There's this belief, thanks to the Fed and others, that we have too hot of a labor market right now, that there are too many jobs and too few workers, and nobody wants to work, is also a trope that they've said. That cannot be true, while also we have this problem of an influx of migrant workers. If that really is the case, that these two things are a problem at once, perhaps we just need a way to process migrants so that they can work in the United States. It seems to me that's a pretty straightforward policy proposal, especially when we think about the global economy as is. We have a lot of jobs leaving the United States. We have some jobs staying in the United States. But when we think about how we're hiring foreigners overseas, the same multinational corporations based in the United States, and we also have workers coming across the border. When we think about the global flow of migration, we can integrate our economies in that way. And that's something that I know a lot of Republicans are not totally on board with, but it will help balance the global economic system if we process the folks coming in and integrate them into the formal economy, especially if the problem is that these folks are drug dealers and criminals. If we don't allow them an opportunity to integrate into our formal economy, they'll grow our informal economy because they have no choice other than to find a way to feed their families and themselves. And so I think there's some policy proposals on that, but that seems to be the direction this needs to go in if we're going to avoid catastrophe.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig more into the economic concerns regarding this flow of migration, because New York Governor Kathy Hochul Hochul, is reportedly considering an unprecedented work authorization for migrants amid the spike in influx. And she said she spoke about this during her visit to the White House last month and added that she might do something at the state level and that this would be unprecedented. According to ABC, a senior administration official said during a call with reporters, there's a critical mass that we are confident are eligible to apply for work authorization immediately. But Hochul clapped back, saying, I don't know what a critical mass is. I don't think it's a high number. A few weeks ago, Hochul called on President Biden to take action and allow migrants to work. Let's watch.
Our quest continues to squarely tell the White House, let them work. Until that happens, we'll continue to need funding and sites from the federal government to help cover the massive expenses of sheltering tens of thousands of people in our country, in our state today. But also,
Karine Jean-Pierre was pressed about why Biden did not meet with Hochul over the migration crisis during her visit to the White House.
But when the governor of New York came by to discuss a very urgent matter in the state of New York and across the country, a lot of big cities, he did not meet with her. Why not?
Well, look, as you just stated, there's a lot going on, and his chief of staff was part of that meeting. I believe Secretary Mayorkas was part of that meeting. Some of his very high-level senior staff participated in the meeting with the governor, which is, as you said, a very important meeting to have. He has a very good relationship with the governor. We've been, every time we're in New York, the president, in practically every time, the president engages with the governors. They have a very good relationship. Look, the president has a lot on his plate. As you said, this is an important issue as well. But when you have the chief of staff, when you have the Secretary of Homeland Security there meeting with the governor, I think that shows how important the president thought this meeting was.
So I think that having a few folks in the administration meet with Governor Hochul, but not Biden when this is a pressing issue, I wish the response was this is what he was handling instead. Some kind of transparency from the administration here. What meeting was he in that was more important than this one? That seems to me the answer that would quell any discontent that Biden didn't meet with Hochul about the migration crisis. But I think maybe it's just that Karine Jean-Pierre is not being properly prepped for her press briefings, especially this controversy where she walked out when asked about Hunter Biden, and kind of how standoffish these press briefings have been. Maybe I shouldn't fault her, because maybe it's something on the administration side that they're not giving her the information needed to answer the press's questions. I'm not sure what's going on here.
You may be right. There was a Washington Post article that came out back during the Biden classified document scandal where Karine Jean-Pierre was caught at the podium saying that there was an additional search of Biden properties and that no new documents had been found, when in fact they actually had been found. And there was a suggestion in the Washington Post reporting that basically Karine Jean-Pierre is not really a trusted member of the administration. She hasn't been brought in on these senior meetings. She hasn't been a part of the decision-making process at all. And so that leads to her being ill-prepared at the podium. And it's sort of a chicken and the egg situation. Do they not bring her in because she's bad at preparing, or is she bad at preparing because they don't bring her in? And it's kind of funny to hear this response on the immigration issue with Governor Hochul, considering that there was just this Vogue profile of Karine Jean-Pierre where they talked about how amazingly prepared and fact-based she is when coming into these briefings and basically fawning all over her. We also have heard that there's a lot of consternation among Democrats with Mayor Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, complaining about the influx of migrants coming in there and their inability to properly house them and take care of them. Instead of having some self-awareness and saying, okay, maybe we need to deal with this problem, the Biden administration has responded by essentially shaming Eric Adams for trying to protect his citizens that he is representing, and has decided that the easier solution is to just send the migrants back to Texas, which is only going to lead, of course, to more overcrowding of facilities. I want to go back for a second as well to this economic issue, because as you mentioned, you're right. They're claiming that this is a hot labor market, but if that's the case, I think our priority should be allowing American workers the opportunity to finally enjoy or negotiate for a wage increase that's long overdue, given the cost of living increases over the past 10 to 20 years, and basically make sure that the American worker is being compensated fairly for their time, that they're having proper work conditions. Instead, what Hochul is suggesting and what the Biden administration is suggesting by giving a bunch of migrants work authorization is allowing migrants to essentially serve as scabs for workers that are trying to advocate for better positions from American citizens.
Yeah, and it's definitely not a right or left administration issue, because you have Jerome Powell, who is the Trump-appointed chair of the Fed, who has stayed in office, who's responsible for saying we've got to do something about the hot labor market. We've got to raise interest rates. This is the chief problem when it comes to quelling price instability and to get inflation under control. We've got to increase interest rates so that the economy cools off a little bit. This kind of policy making goes on whatever administration we've had over the last half of a century. The 1970s were the last time workers enjoyed proportionate compensation with productivity growth in the economy. Since the 1970s, we've seen those metrics diverge. We've seen wages decline while productivity has increased exponentially. And so that's a big problem when we see corporations reaping the profits and the benefits of this by design economy that benefits the wealthiest in the country, the owners of corporations and the shareholders, while workers, while being more productive, are being paid less and less and now struggling to get by. And so we see this as a problem with Republican and Democratic administrations. And I think this is why you have 40% of the American people not voting in elections. This is why you see a lean for a third party in the United States right now. And this seems to be the one issue that if a candidate talks about it and takes it seriously, they will win public office, whether they're running for governor or mayor of New York, or I think the presidency, if they make this the central focus of their campaign.
Yeah, I think we can address inflation, but also acknowledge that workforce participation is too low, that more people need to be going to work and need to be getting real wages that can support a family. And we should be able to address both of those issues at the same time. We'll be back with more Rising after this.